I just wanted to help my son and his wife with their mortgage, but in return for my kindness, they gave me an ultimatum: give them my house and disappear. This betrayal opened my eyes to their true intentions and forced me to reveal a secret I'd kept for 30 years. You won't believe how this secret not only saved me, but also completely destroyed their lives. My name is Beatrice Holloway, and let me tell you, life is a lot like a recipe. You can follow it to the letter, measure every ingredient just so, and still end up with a mess. It's not a Hallmark movie, and I'm certainly no damsel in distress. I'm a 63-year-old woman with hands that know the difference between a rose bush and a weed, and a mind that can spot a lie from a mile away. My late husband, Robert, always said I was the most practical person he'd ever met. Maybe that's why I'm still here, still standing in this house, our house, a place he built with his own two hands, a modest two-story colonial on a quiet street in suburban Atlanta, filled with a lifetime of memories. Every faded mark on the floor, every dent in the wall, it's all a part of us. My son Michael and his wife Brittany seem to think of it as just real estate, an item on a balance sheet, a source of cash for their next big adventure, which always seems to involve an upgrade in lifestyle and a downgrade in my peace of mind. The passive-aggressive comments started years ago. "Mom, this place is so charmingly old," Brittany would say, her words a thinly veiled insult. Or Michael would sigh, "We're just so worried about you, Mom. This house is a lot to handle." They were worried about my house, not me. Their financial issues were a constant presence, a dark cloud that followed them everywhere. Michael, a marketing manager with champagne tastes on a beer budget. Brittany, a self-proclaimed social media guru whose online life was a lot more glamorous than her real one. I've helped them time and again, paying for a new car, bailing them out of credit card debt, even putting money toward their dream vacation to Italy. I was a human ATM, and they were always ready for a withdrawal. Today was supposed to be a reprieve from all that. My grandson Liam's 8th birthday. He's the sweetest boy you'll ever meet, with my husband's kind eyes and a smile that could melt glaciers. I was in the kitchen, carefully scooping dough for his favorite chocolate chip cookies, a recipe Robert and I had perfected together. The air was filled with the warm, comforting scent of sugar and vanilla. My phone buzzed with a text from Michael. "On our way. Don't worry about a thing." That's the phrase that sets off all my internal alarms. "Don't worry" from Michael means it's time to worry. I tried to push the feeling aside, telling myself it was just a regular birthday party. I finished the cookies and set out the vintage Lego castle I had found for Liam. I wanted this house to feel like a haven for him, a place where he could escape all the superficial nonsense that seemed to consume his parents. The car pulled into the driveway, and my heart sunk. It wasn't just Michael, Brittany, and Liam, but it was Brittany's parents, the Holcombs. Mr. Holcomb, a man who looked like he was perpetually sucking on a lemon, and Mrs. Holcomb, whose entire personality seemed to be based on judging other people's life choices. The whole clan had arrived, all smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes. Liam burst through the door and ran straight to me, his arms wrapping tightly around my waist. "Grandma!" he exclaimed, his voice full of genuine joy. That hug was my strength, a reminder of what was truly important. I ruffled his hair. "I missed you too, honey. Your favorite cookies are ready." Just then, Brittany glided in, her smile a little too tight, her eyes scanning the room. "Mom, Beatrice, you really shouldn't have," she said, her voice dripping with fake concern. "We're on a cleanse now." The Holcombs nodded in grim agreement, their disapproval as thick as the Georgia humidity. They stood in the middle of my kitchen, a silent, judgmental jury. Michael, for his part, wouldn't even look at me. He was playing his favorite role, the man who wasn't involved. As I was about to pour the coffee, Michael finally spoke. "Mom, we need to talk." The words hung in the air, heavy and full of unspoken malice. Liam, oblivious, was already reaching for a cookie. "Can I have one, Grandma?" he asked. I smiled at him, a real smile. "Of course, darling. They're all for you." I handed him the tin, and he hugged it like a treasure. That's when the real conversation began. Michael looked at the floor as he spoke. "Mom, we've decided it's time for you to sell the house." The words were a physical blow. Brittany immediately jumped in, her voice dripping with condescension. "Mom Beatrice, it's for your own good. This house is a lot of work for a woman your age." I felt the heat rise in my face. A woman your age? I was a successful 63-year-old woman, not a frail invalid. "I'm perfectly capable of taking care of my home," I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. Brittany ignored me. "We found the perfect retirement community for you. So many activities." Bingo and shuffleboard, she might as well have said. I was a person, not a stereotype. Mr. Holcomb, in a show of cold-hearted pragmatism, explained the real reason. "Beatrice, Michael and Brittany need equity in this house. They're in a financial bind. They wanted to sell my home, the place where I had raised my son and loved my husband, to pay for their poor life choices. It was an audacity so staggering, it was almost comical." My rage was a quiet, simmering thing. I looked at Liam, who was happily eating a cookie, and the anger was replaced by a fierce resolve. This was his safe space, too. I wasn't going to let them take it. Brittany sealed the deal with a cruel final blow. "It's already been decided, Mom Beatrice. The realtor is coming by on Friday. You can start packing." I stood there, silent. They thought I was beaten. They thought I was a helpless old woman they could walk all over. But what they didn't know was that I had a secret. A big one that was about to turn their world upside down. They were about to learn that you don't mess with a woman who has nothing left to lose. Hey everyone, if you're enjoying this so far, please hit that subscribe button. It helps me share more stories of truth and triumph with you all. I stood there, a strange calm settling over me. It was the kind of stillness you feel just before a hurricane hits. My son, Michael, couldn't look me in the eye. He just kept staring at the floor, his mouth a thin, miserable line. Brittany, on the other hand, was practically glowing with self-satisfaction. She had won, and she knew it. In her mind, the game was over, and the house keys were practically in her hand. But what she didn't know was that the game had just begun. "Start packing," she repeated, as if I hadn't heard her the first time. The words were a command, not a suggestion. I took a slow breath, forcing myself to respond. "Brittany," I said, my voice quiet but firm, "you don't have the right to tell me to do anything. This is my house, and I'm not going anywhere." My words seemed to startle her. Her triumphant smirk faltered for a second, but then she recovered, letting out a laugh that was a little too loud and a little too fake. "Oh, Mom Beatrice, don't be ridiculous. This is for your own good. We're just trying to help." That word again. Help. In their vocabulary, help meant taking something from me. Michael finally spoke up, his voice a pathetic mumble. "Mom, please, just listen to us. We've been planning this for a while. The retirement community is really nice. You'll make so many friends." He said it like I was some lonely, pathetical woman who couldn't manage her own life. I looked at him, truly looked at him, and saw a stranger. This wasn't the boy I had raised, the one who used to hug me and say I was the best mom in the world. This was a man who had been poisoned by greed. "You've been planning this?" I asked, my voice laced with sarcasm, so sharp it could cut glass. "You've been planning to sell my home behind my back?" He flinched. Brittany, sensing his weakness, stepped in, a hand on his arm. "Mom Beatrice, we are in a tight spot. We just want to get you set up somewhere safe and secure, and this is the easiest way to do it. You don't need all this space." She gestured around the kitchen, her face a mask of patronizing concern. I was done with their lies.
I looked at Liam, who was now sitting at the kitchen table, lost in the world of his Lego set. I had to do this for him. I had to protect this sanctuary. "I'll tell you what I need, Brittany," I said, my voice cold. "I need you to leave my house." Her eyes went wide. She was not used to being challenged. She looked at Michael, expecting him to back her up. He just shuffled his feet, his gaze still fixed on the floor. That's when Mr. Holcomb decided to assert himself. "Now look here, Beatrice. This is a very generous offer. Michael and Brittany are doing this out of love. They're trying to give you a comfortable life." I scoffed. "A comfortable life? By stealing my comfort and selling my home? Is that what you call love?" I turned my gaze to him. "And who are you to tell me about love, sir? The man who won't even let his own daughter visit her grandparents because you don't approve of their rustic life?" The accusation hung in the air. He turned a deep shade of red, a vein throbbing in his temple. Brittany's mother, Mrs. Holcomb, stepped forward, her voice a low hiss. "How dare you speak to my husband that way? We are trying to do what is best for the family. My family is in this house, my husband's legacy, my grandson's memories. You think you can just march in here and erase it all for a down payment on a new life? You have another thing coming." My outburst seemed to catch them completely off guard. They had expected me to cry, to beg, to be the sweet, meek old lady they thought I was. But they had miscalculated. I wasn't a fragile teacup. I was a cast iron skillet, and I was about to show them exactly what I was made of. Michael finally found his voice. "Mom, don't do this. Don't make this difficult." I looked at him, the hurt and betrayal a physical weight in my chest. "You made it difficult, Michael. You and your wife, not me." Liam, sensing the tension, looked up from his Legos, his face a small mirror of my own turmoil. "Grandma, are you okay?" he whispered. My heart ached for him. I knelt down and put my arm around his small shoulders. "I'm fine, honey," I said, my voice softening. "Everything's going to be just fine." I gave him a quick hug and stood back up, my gaze sweeping over the faces of the people who had just tried to ruin my life. "I think you should all leave," I said, my voice no longer angry but cold and final. "You have no right to be here, and I will not be selling my house. Ever." Brittany's face twisted into a mask of pure rage. "You can't do this. We have a contract with the realtor." "It's not a contract until it's signed," I said with a small smile. "And my signature is not for sale." They stood there for a moment, stunned into silence. Then, one by one, they began to move toward the door. Michael was the last to go. He stopped at the entrance, his shoulders slumped in defeat. "Mom," he started, his voice a broken whisper. "I'm sorry, but you leave us no choice." I just shook my head. "You always have a choice, Michael. You just keep making the wrong one." And with that, he turned and left, the door closing with a quiet click behind him. I stood in the silence of my home, the only sound the soft click of Liam's Legos. I had won the first battle, but I knew the war was far from over. They would be back, and they would be angrier than ever. They had no idea what they were up against. They thought they knew me, but they had no idea who I really was. They had no idea about the secret I had been keeping for 30 years. A secret that was about to change everything. That's just a small taste of the turmoil I'm facing. Don't you want to see how I handle this mess? Stay tuned for the next chapter. You won't want to miss what happens next.
That strange stillness that had settled over me was a shield, a calm fury that they, in their self-serving blindness, mistook for weakness. Michael shuffled his feet, his gaze fixed on the worn Persian rug, a gift from my late husband's great-aunt. A rug that Michael had once loved, tracing the intricate patterns with his tiny fingers.
Now he was too busy counting the imagined dollars it would bring to see the memories woven into its threads. Brittany, on the other hand, was an entirely different species of infuriating. She wasn't looking at the rug. She was looking past it, seeing a sleek, modern floor in her mind's eye, a floor that I would not be standing on. "You're being difficult, Mom Beatrice," she said, her voice dropping the false sweetness for a tone of pure irritation. "We're trying to make this easy for everyone. You get a nice, clean, new place, and we get a fresh start." I almost laughed. Their fresh start meant a financial reset button pressed at my expense. It meant I would lose everything. And the worst part? They truly believed they were the heroes in this little drama, the brave children sacrificing their emotional well-being to save their clueless mother. "A fresh start for you, perhaps," I replied, my voice as level as a sheet of ice. "But what about me? What about Liam? This is his home. This is where his daddy grew up." My words hit Michael like a blow. He finally looked up, a flash of shame in his eyes. For a second, I saw a glimmer of the little boy I used to know, the one who would hide behind my apron when he was scared. But the moment passed. The shame quickly gave way to the familiar mask of a man who had made his choice and was sticking to it no matter the cost. "Mom, this is not a negotiation," he said, his voice flat and final. "We've already gone over this. We have a buyer. The deal is practically done." I took a step closer to him, my gaze unwavering. "No, Michael, the deal is not done, because I own this house, free and clear. I have the deed, the keys, and the will. And I have something else you don't have, the will to fight for what is right." My words seemed to catch Brittany off guard. Her face, a moment ago a picture of smug satisfaction, now showed a flicker of real concern. "What do you mean, you have the will?" she asked, her voice sharp. "Your husband left the house to Michael, didn't he? That's what you said." I shook my head, a small, knowing smile touching my lips. "No, Brittany, I said he left the house to me. And you never bothered to ask for details, did you? You were too busy counting your chickens before they hatched. The truth was, Robert and I had always been private people. We didn't believe in flaunting our wealth or discussing our finances with anyone, especially not with our son and his perpetually hungry wife. They just assumed, as greedy people often do, that they knew the whole story. They saw a woman living in a modest home, driving a modest car, and they filled in the blanks with what they wanted to see. They saw a woman in need of a handout, not a woman who could give them a masterclass in financial independence. I could feel their unease growing. The silence stretched between us, thick and uncomfortable. Liam, thankfully, was still absorbed in his Legos, oblivious to the high-stakes game being played over his head. Mr. Holcomb cleared his throat, a low, rumbling sound. "Look, Eleanor," he said, using my real name for the first time, "let's not get emotional. We're all adults here. Let's talk about a fair price. We can get you a nice sum for this place, enough to live on comfortably for the rest of your days." His condescension was a fresh wave of offense. "A fair price?" I scoffed. "You think you can buy me off? Buy my memories, my husband's legacy, my grandson's childhood? No, sir. This house is not for sale, not at any price." I watched the anger build on his face. He wasn't used to being defied, especially not by a woman. He looked at his wife, then at Brittany, then back at me, as if searching for some kind of logical explanation for my refusal to bow down. Brittany, ever the strategist, changed her approach. "Mom Beatrice, we're just thinking about your well-being. This house is so old. What if something breaks? What if you fall and get hurt? Who's going to take care of you?" Her voice was full of manufactured worry, a performance for the benefit of her parents. But I saw the real motive behind her eyes, fear, the fear that her grand plan was unraveling. I let out a slow, deliberate sigh. "Brittany, you don't have to worry about me. I have everything under control." I looked at my grandson, then back at her. The people who worry about me are the ones who don't want to take my house and sell it for their own gain." My words were a direct hit. She visibly flinched. Michael just stood there, a silent spectator to his wife's undoing. He looked trapped, a pawn in a game he started but couldn't control. The Holcombs, realizing they were losing this round, began to retreat. Mr. Holcomb gave a stiff nod. "We'll be in touch," he said, the words a veiled threat. "We'll talk about this again when you've had time to think." "There's nothing to think about," I said, my voice as final as a closing door. "The answer is no. Now I think it's time for you all to leave. The party is over." They left in a flurry of mumbled goodbyes. The silence they left behind a welcome relief. Michael lingered for a moment, his gaze a mixture of defeat and resentment. "Mom, you're making a huge mistake," he said, his voice a low, angry whisper. I just shook my head. "No, Michael, the mistake was thinking I wouldn't fight for this house. Now, please, leave." He turned and walked out, the closing of the door a full stop on a terrible chapter. I was alone with Liam. The silence was broken only by the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the gentle clatter of his Legos. I sank into a kitchen chair, the exhaustion finally hitting me. I had won this battle, but I knew, with absolute certainty, that the war had just begun. They would be back, and they would be angrier, more determined, and more ruthless than ever before. But they had no idea who they were dealing with. They saw a tired, grieving widow. They didn't see the woman who had spent a lifetime learning to fight for what she loved. They were about to learn a very hard lesson. That's what happened. Do you think I made the right choice? It's not over yet.
The moment the door closed, an eerie silence filled the house. Liam was still lost in his Lego world, humming a little tune to himself, completely oblivious to the war that had just been declared. The air, which had been thick with tension, now felt empty. The warmth of the kitchen, so comforting just a few moments ago, now felt cold and desolate. I sank onto a kitchen chair, my legs shaking a little. I had held it all together, had presented a solid front, but now the adrenaline was fading, replaced by a bone-deep weariness. I looked at the counter, where I'd left the cookies. They seemed like relics from a different, happier time. I grabbed one and bit into it. It was dry and tasteless. The magic was gone. I sat there for a long time, watching Liam, listening to the soft plastic clicking as he built his castle. He was so innocent, so pure. He was my anchor, the one true thing in a sea of greed and betrayal. It was for him that I had to fight. The realization hit me with the force of a tidal wave. I couldn't just stand on my moral high ground and hope for the best. Michael and Brittany weren't going to give up. They had already gone behind my back, had already lined up a realtor. They thought they had me cornered. They saw a 63-year-old woman alone in a house that was now a financial burden to them, and they saw an easy mark. What they didn't know was that they had awakened a beast, and this beast knew how to fight. My mind started to race, moving from emotion to cold, hard strategy. What was my first move? I had to get ahead of them. I had to make my secret public, but not in a way that would be easily dismissed. I had to turn their greed against them. I needed an audience, a platform. My hands, still trembling slightly, found my phone. I scrolled through my contacts until I found a name I hadn't called in years. George, my late husband's best friend. He had a way with technology, a knack for making things go viral before viral was even a word. I dialed his number, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. He picked up on the third ring. "Beatrice, my goodness, I haven't heard from you in ages. How are you holding up?"
His voice was a lifeline, familiar and kind. The tears I had been holding back for hours now threatened to spill over. "George," I said, my voice cracking, "I'm not doing so well. I need your help." I didn't mince words. I told him everything: the ultimatum, the realtor, the smug faces of Brittany and her parents. They thought I was a helpless old woman, a relic to be moved aside. I heard him take a sharp breath. "I'm on your way, Bia. Don't do a single thing until I get there. Don't sign a single paper. Don't even talk to them." The reassurance in his voice was like a balm on a raw wound. Within an hour, his beat-up pickup truck was in my driveway. He was a tall man, a little hunched with age, but his eyes were as sharp and clear as ever. He walked into the kitchen, his gaze sweeping the scene: the half-eaten cookies, the untouched Legos, the grim set of my mouth. He didn't ask questions. He just sat down across from me, his presence a quiet comfort. "So," he said, his voice low, "let's talk about this secret of yours." I took a deep breath. 30 years ago, Robert's grandfather passed away. Everyone thought he was just a regular working-class guy. He was a quiet man, a gardener like me, and he lived in a small cabin up in the mountains. But there was a secret, a big one. I went on to explain how Robert's grandfather, Thomas, was actually the sole heir to a long-forgotten family fortune, a fortune so massive, so carefully hidden that nobody, not even Robert's own father, knew about it. Thomas, a man who cherished simplicity, had left it all to Robert, with one condition: it was to remain a secret. It was a trust managed by an old private firm in Switzerland, and it was to be used only in times of great need to preserve the family's legacy. George sat there completely silent, his eyes wide open. I pulled a small, worn leather book from a hidden compartment behind a loose brick in the fireplace. Inside were the deeds, the certificates, and the account numbers, the key to everything. "Robert and I always kept it a secret," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "We never touched it. We lived our lives, built our home, and we were happy. We always said it was for a rainy day. Well, George, I think it's pouring." George's face, which had been pale with shock, now began to crack into a grin. "My goodness, Beatrice, that's an incredible story." "I know," I said, "and now I need to tell it. To the whole world." George looked at me with a question in his eyes. "You don't just want to pay them off, do you?" I shook my head, my face set in a grim expression. "No, I want to teach them a lesson. I want them to know what it feels like to lose everything they thought they had. I want to show them what it's truly rich, and it has nothing to do with money." We spent the next few hours meticulously planning. George was a whiz with social media, and he had an idea, a very public idea. He was going to use his connections to get my story on a local news channel. We would go live from my house, a house they thought they had already sold. He would film me standing in my home telling my story to the world, a story of betrayal and a story of a long-lost fortune. The plan was audacious, risky, and exactly what I needed. I felt a surge of energy I hadn't felt in years. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about justice. This was about showing my son and his wife that they couldn't just walk all over me, that they couldn't just take my home and my legacy. They were about to learn that they had messed with the wrong woman, and I was going to show them exactly what that meant.
The moment George left, the silence in the house was no longer empty. It was filled with a new energy, a crackle of anticipation. My mind, which had been a whirlwind of despair and hurt, was now sharp and focused. I walked over to the fireplace, my fingers finding the loose brick. The little leather book, the one that held the key to everything, felt heavy in my hand. It was more than a book. It was my proof, my weapon, and my revenge all rolled into one. I tucked it safely away and went to find Liam. He was in his room, surrounded by a mess of colorful Lego bricks, the castle he was building now a formidable fortress. I sat down on the floor next to him. "Honey," I said, my voice soft, "I have a story for you." He looked up from his work, his eyes wide and curious. "A story?" he asked. "A very old story," I said with a smile, "about a boy named Robert who had a grandfather named Thomas, and this Thomas was a very special man, a secret keeper." I told him about the cabin in the mountains, about the love for simplicity, and about the hidden fortune. I didn't tell him the full scope of the money, just that it was a treasure, a secret that had been passed down. I watched his face, and I saw a new light in his eyes, a sense of wonder and connection to a family history he never knew existed. That night, I didn't sleep. I was too busy planning. George had already arranged for a local news crew to come to the house the next day. A reporter he knew, a sharp woman named Sarah Jenkins, was intrigued by the story. She had a keen eye for human interest pieces, especially those with a dramatic twist. I spent hours going through old photographs, gathering documents, and preparing my statement. I wasn't going to yell or get emotional. I was going to be calm, collected, and devastatingly factual. The next morning, the doorbell rang exactly at 9. It was Sarah and her cameraman, a quiet young man named Mark. Sarah had a warm, no-nonsense demeanor. She looked around my house, her eyes taking in the details, the worn couch, the family photos, the smell of fresh coffee. "So, Beatrice," she said, setting up her equipment, "tell me everything, from the beginning." And so I did. I told her about my life with Robert, about the joy we found in our simple life, and about the secret we had kept for so long. I told her about Michael and Brittany's visit, about their ultimatum, and about how they had tried to take my home. I showed her the old leather book, the documents, and the deed to the house. I watched her eyes widen as she looked at the names and dates, the proof that this wasn't just a story. It was all real. "They think I'm an old lady they can push around," I said, my voice steady. "They want to sell my house to pay for their lifestyle. But this house isn't just a house. It's a legacy, and I'm not going to let them destroy it." The cameraman, Mark, was filming everything, his lens capturing the determination on my face. We shot the segment in the kitchen, the very place where Michael and Brittany had tried to humiliate me. I spoke directly to the camera, my voice a quiet roar of defiance. "This is my home," I said, "and my son and his wife, in their greed, tried to take it from me. They thought I had no power. They thought I was alone. But what they didn't know is that they were dealing with the heiress of a fortune they couldn't even imagine, a fortune that was hidden to protect it from people just like them." The segment ended with me holding up the small leather book, the very symbol of my quiet power. "This is for my grandson," I said, a tear finally escaping my eye. "This is for Liam, so that he knows what true family legacy means. It's not about how much money you have, it's about who you are." After they left, I felt a sense of calm I hadn't felt in weeks. The story was out there. The first shot had been fired. I didn't know how Michael and Brittany would react, but I knew it wouldn't be good. I knew they would be furious, embarrassed, and desperate. But for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid. I had taken control of the narrative. I had put my cards on the table, and I was ready for whatever came next. That's how it started. I told my story to the world, and now the whole town knows what my son and his wife tried to do. But what happens when they see it on the news? You won't want to miss what comes next. The real battle is just about to begin.
That evening, the first domino fell. I was sitting in my living room, the quiet hum of the television a welcome distraction, when my phone started ringing off the hook. First, it was Michael. I let it go to voicemail. Then, it was Brittany. I sent her call to voicemail too. Then, a text from Michael. "Mom, what is this nonsense? The realtor just called me. She said you won't sell. What did you tell her?" Another one followed. Call me back. Now. This is important." I smiled. The panic in his messages was palpable. But the real firestorm began when the news segment aired. It was the lead story on the 6 o'clock news. I watched it, a strange mix of dread and satisfaction churning in my stomach. The reporter, Sarah Jenkins, was brilliant. She started with a shot of my modest, quiet house and then a quick cut to me in my kitchen, looking directly into the camera. She narrated the story with just the right amount of gravitas, describing my life, my husband, and my quiet existence before the betrayal. She showed the old documents and the small leather book, hinting at a secret fortune without revealing the full extent of it. The segment ended with me, my voice strong and clear, saying my final words to Michael and Brittany. My phone blew up almost immediately. I didn't answer. I just sat there watching the chaos unfold on my screen. Calls from Michael, Brittany, even the Holcombs. Text messages filled with a new kind of fury. "How could you do this?" one said. "You've ruined everything," another shrieked. It was magnificent. For the first time, I felt like I wasn't just reacting to their cruelty, I was controlling the narrative. About an hour later, the doorbell rang. I peered through the peephole. It was Michael and Brittany. Their faces were flushed with a mixture of rage and shock. Michael's hair was disheveled, and Brittany's perfect makeup was smudged under her eyes. She pounded on the door. "Beatrice, open this door right now!" she screamed. Her voice was raw with fury. "What did you do?" I didn't open it. I went to the window and looked out. Liam, who was staying with me for the night, had heard the commotion and was peeking out from his room. I put a finger to my lips, and he quickly ducked back inside. I wasn't going to let them frighten him. I walked back to the front door, and though it remained closed, I spoke loudly enough for them to hear me. "I don't know what you're talking about," I said, my voice sweet and innocent. "And even if I did, I told you yesterday, I am not selling this house, and you are not welcome here." Brittany let out a screech of rage. "You went on the news? You aired our private family business for the whole world to see? How dare you?" "It wasn't private, Brittany," I said, my voice still calm. "When you tried to sell my home and force me out, you made it public. Now please, I have a grandson to put to bed. You're scaring him." That last sentence was a lie, but it hit them right where it hurt. I knew they were concerned with appearances, with what the neighbors would think. Michael, ever the coward, spoke up. "Mom, we have to talk about this. This is completely insane. What were you thinking?" "I was thinking about you," I said, and the truth of it was almost painful. I was thinking about how little you care for me and how much you care about money. And I decided to give you something to truly worry about. A long silence followed. I heard them whispering outside the door, their voices low and sharp with anger. I knew they were plotting their next move, but I also knew they had underestimated me. They had no idea about the true extent of the fortune. They thought I was bluffing, that I had some small, insignificant amount of money. They still believed they could pressure me into selling. They were about to be very, very wrong. I had planted the seed of doubt. Now it was time to let it grow. I turned away from the door and walked to Liam's room. He was sitting on his bed, his face a mix of fear and curiosity. He said, "Grandma, are they gone?" "Yes, honey," I said, tucking him in. "They're gone, and they won't be back tonight. We're safe." He looked up at me, his eyes full of admiration. "Grandma, you're so brave," he whispered. I smiled, a genuine smile this time. "Sometimes, honey, being brave is just a matter of not letting them see how scared you are." And at that moment, I realized something. This wasn't just about me and my son anymore. It was about teaching Liam a lesson about courage, standing up for what's right, and fighting for your family. This was my legacy, not just some dusty old fortune. And I wasn't going to let them destroy it. They've seen the news, and they're furious, but they still don't know the whole story. What will they do now that their plan is public? You won't want to miss what happens next. The war is just getting started.
Their pounding on the door eventually stopped, but the war wasn't over. It had just moved to a new front: social media. The news segment went viral. My phone, which I had put on silent, continued to vibrate with notifications. I logged into my old Facebook account, a place I hadn't visited in years, where I'd only posted pictures of my garden and my late husband's prize-winning roses. Now my feed was a firestorm of comments, shares, and reactions. A friend from high school, whom I hadn't seen in 4 decades, messaged me. "Beatrice, I saw you on the news. That's terrible. Let me know if you need anything." A woman I didn't know at all commented, "I know exactly how this feels. My own son tried to take my retirement. You're a hero for standing up for yourself." The support was overwhelming, a tidal wave of compassion and shared stories of betrayal. It was a digital army I never knew I had. I knew Michael and Brittany were seeing all of this. They were being publicly shamed, their carefully constructed image of a successful, loving family crumbling with every share. Their social media profiles, once filled with glamorous photos and polished captions, were now a battlefield of angry comments. People were calling them out, exposing their greed for all to see. The humiliation I have felt in my kitchen was now theirs, multiplied 1,000 times over in the public square. The next morning, the doorbell rang again. This time, I didn't have to look through the peephole. I knew who it was. The realtor, a woman named Sharon, stood on my porch, her face a mask of professional politeness strained with barely concealed frustration. "Beatrice, can we talk for a moment?" she asked, her voice a little too sweet. I opened the door just a crack. "I told you yesterday, I am not selling this house." She was clearly a professional, trained to handle difficult situations, but I wasn't a difficult situation. I was a woman on a mission. "Then the contract is void," I said, and closed the door on her bewildered face. I immediately called George. "George, they forged my signature. They showed the realtor documents they said I had signed. I need to get ahead of this. I need to go to the police." He was quiet for a moment. "No, Beatrice," he said, "not yet. We have a better idea. This is our chance to expose the full extent of their lies." He told me he had an even bigger opportunity lined up. A national news network had picked up the local story, and they wanted a live interview, not from my house, but from their studio. The following day, I put on my best clothes, a simple but elegant blue dress, and took a taxi to the news studio. I felt a strange mix of fear and exhilaration. I was about to go on national television and reveal my secret to millions of people. I was no longer a quiet, unassuming widow. I was a fighter, and I was ready for the final battle. The studio was a whirlwind of activity, with lights, cameras, and technicians rushing around. I was sat in a comfortable chair, and a microphone was clipped to my lapel. The anchor, a famous news journalist named Robert Evans, gave me a reassuring smile. "Beatrice, thank you for being here. You're very brave." The red light on the camera went on, and we were live. Robert started the interview by playing a clip from the local news segment and then turned to me. "Beatrice, the story of your son and daughter-in-law trying to force you out of your home has captivated the nation.
But there's a rumor circulating that this goes even deeper, that they may have forged documents to sell your home. Is this true? I looked straight into the camera, my voice clear and steady. Yes, it's true. They went behind my back, had a realtor, and forged my name on documents they hoped would sell my home and give me my money. I saw the shock on Robert's face and knew the country was watching. I took a deep breath and prepared to play my final hand. I've just gone on national television and accused my son of forgery. The stakes have never been higher. Do you think they will finally back down, or will they come back with an even more devious plan? You'll have to keep reading to find out.
The red light on the camera went out, but the conversation with Robert Evans wasn't over. He leaned forward, his face serious. Beatrice, this is a very grave accusation. Forgery is a serious crime. Do you have proof? I looked at him calmly and pulled out a small thumb drive from my purse. It was a digital copy of the documents from the leather book. Every certificate, every deed, and every account number. A full, verifiable history of the trust. George had insisted I bring a copy. The original documents are in a safety deposit box, I said, but this contains everything, and it's not just a collection of papers. It's a trail of wealth that goes back decades. I handed him the drive. His eyes widened as he read the names on the first few documents. He understood immediately what this meant. This wasn't just a story about a family squabble. It was a bombshell, a story of a long-lost fortune and the greed that it uncovered. He stood up, excusing himself for a moment, and I watched him go, feeling a strange mix of power and fear. I had just put my entire life on the line, but I had to. I had to expose them, to show them what it meant to fight for your legacy. I was driven home by a young assistant from the studio. As we pulled into my driveway, I saw a police car parked in front of my house. My heart pounded in my chest. Had they found out I was on the news? Had they filed a complaint? I took a deep breath, grabbed my purse, and walked to the door, ready for another confrontation. A police officer, a tall, serious-looking man, was standing at my front door. "Ma'am, are you Beatrice Holloway?" he asked, his voice formal. "Yes, I am," I said, my voice as steady as I could make it. "We have a report of a disturbance. Your son and daughter-in-law filed a complaint. They said you were refusing to leave the premises and were harassing them." I almost laughed out loud. The audacity was incredible. They were using the system against me. "Officer," I said, my voice calm, "I have no idea what they're talking about. This is my home. My son and his wife have been trying to force me to sell it, and I've been refusing. I think they're just upset that their plan didn't work." He looked at me, a flicker of doubt in his eyes. Just then my phone rang. It was George. I answered. "Beatrice, did you see it? The segment is blowing up. Robert Evans just released a statement online about the documents. The story is everywhere." I hung up and looked at the officer. "Officer, my story has just gone national. You might want to check the news. My son and his wife are not victims. They are the ones who are harassing me." He took a moment, pulled out his own phone, and scrolled through the news. I watched his face as he read. The shock and disbelief were clear. "I see," he said, his voice now a lot less formal. "Ma'am, I apologize. It seems we were given some incomplete information." He turned to his partner, who was still in the car, and waved him over. He spoke to him in a low voice and then turned back to me. "Ma'am, we'll be leaving now. I'll make a note of this, and if they come here again, you have my number. Don't hesitate to call." I thanked him and watched them drive away, feeling a new kind of relief. The police were on my side. I was no longer fighting alone. I walked into my quiet home, the silence a stark contrast to the storm I knew was raging outside. I was winning, but I knew this was just the beginning. The biggest confrontation was to come. They would be back, and they would be angrier and more desperate than ever. I've gone on national TV, and the police are on my side.
But they haven't given up yet. What will they do now that their plan is falling apart? The climax is just around the corner, and you won't want to miss it.
The silence in the house was a fragile peace. I knew Michael and Brittany were plotting, their greed driving them to desperate measures. They couldn't stand the public humiliation, but they also couldn't walk away from the imagined money. I had played my hand, but I still had one last card up my sleeve, a card I had been saving for the perfect moment. I called George. "George," I said, my voice low, "it's time. I want to tell the full story, everything." He immediately understood. The news segment had created a national audience, and now was the time to give them the finale they had been waiting for. We planned a new live stream, a direct appeal to the public, this time from my own living room. The theme was clear, a final, definitive answer to my son and his wife. The next day, I dressed in the same blue dress for my TV appearance. George set up his camera, the lights, and the microphone, and within minutes, we were live. The viewers poured in, a torrent of support and curiosity. I looked at the camera, my face a mask of calm determination. "My name is Beatrice Holloway," I began, my voice clear and steady. "And I'm here to tell you the final chapter of my story. My son and his wife, in their desperation, have accused me of harassment and are trying to force me out of my home. They've even gone so far as to forge documents in an attempt to sell it." The online comments exploded. I paused and then continued. "But what they don't know and what they will learn right now is that they have messed with the wrong woman." I held up the small leather book, the one that contained the truth. "For 30 years, my late husband and I kept a secret passed down from his grandfather, a simple gardener. The man everyone thought was a simple man was actually the sole heir to a long-forgotten family fortune, a fortune so vast it would take generations to spend." I looked directly at the camera. "Michael, Brittany, I want you to listen very carefully. You tried to take my house. You tried to steal my memories and my peace. You tried to force me out and humiliate me. But you failed. And now you will learn why." I opened the book, showing the documents to the camera one by one. I explained how the fortune was in a trust set up to protect it from greed and how the trustee was George. "I could have just given you money," I said, my voice full of sorrow that cut through my anger. "I could have helped you out of your debt. But I saw the kind of people you were becoming. You were willing to sacrifice your own mother for your greed, and I couldn't let that happen. Not to my son, and not to my grandson." The climax had arrived. My phone, which was next to the camera, started vibrating wildly. They were watching. They were hearing every single word. I knew they were panicking, their perfect world of deceit and avarice crumbling around them. My son told me yesterday that I was making a huge mistake, and in a way, he was right. He was wrong about who was making the mistake, though. The mistake was thinking that I was powerless. The mistake was underestimating me. The mistake was thinking that all I had was a house, but I have my pride. I have my strength, and I have a legacy that is not for sale. I closed the book and looked at the camera one last time. And so, to my son and his wife, I have this to say. The game is over. You have lost. This house is not for sale, and you will not be getting a single penny from me. I felt a sense of finality. The war was over. I had won, but the victory felt bittersweet. I had won my house, but I had lost my son. The price of justice was high, but I knew in my heart that I had done the right thing. The live stream is over, and I've laid all my cards on the table. They know everything now. Will they try to fight back, or will they finally admit defeat? The final chapter will reveal the true outcome. You won't want to miss it. The live stream ended, but the battle was far from over. I knew they were out there, watching, seething,
And now, finally, terrified. My phone rang immediately, and this time I answered. It was Michael, his voice a panicked, furious roar. What the hell, Mom? What is this? What's a trust fund? What are you talking about? He sounded unhinged, his carefully constructed facade of control completely gone. I'm talking about everything, Michael, I said, my voice calm and steady. I'm talking about how you tried to ruin me and how you failed. There was a pause, a moment of silence filled with his heavy breathing. Then a new voice, just as furious, but with a panicked edge. It was Brittany. You can't do this, Beatrice. The lawyers, you'll ruin us. What do you want? A cut? Is that it? You want a bigger piece of the pie? Her question was a fresh wave of offense. They still thought it was about money. They still couldn't grasp that my fight was for justice, for my home, and for my dignity. I don't want a penny from you, I said, my voice cold. I just want you to leave me alone and to never contact me or my grandson again. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. I knew they were stunned, their entire worldview shattering. They had lived their lives believing everything had a price, and I had just proven them wrong. I hung up the phone and sank into the couch, a deep, bone-wearied exhaustion settling over me. I had won the war, but the victory felt bittersweet. I had saved my home, but I had lost my son forever. The next few days were quiet. There were no more angry phone calls or late night visits. My home was a sanctuary again, a place of peace and quiet. The news stories faded, replaced by new scandals and new dramas. My life went back to normal, but with a new sense of purpose and strength. I spent my days gardening, volunteering at the animal shelter, and most importantly, spending time with Liam. I told him stories about his great grandfather, Thomas, and about the legacy of strength and integrity he had left behind. Then one morning, the doorbell rang. I peered through the peephole. It was Michael. He was alone, his shoulders slumped, his face pale and drawn. He looked 1,000 years old. I hesitated, my hand on the doorknob. The hurt and betrayal were still fresh. But a small voice in my head, a voice that sounded a lot like my late husband, told me to open the door. I had to face him, for closure if nothing else. I opened the door, but I didn't invite him in. He stood there, on my porch, looking at me with eyes full of a pathetic kind of sadness. He looked beaten, a man who had finally realized the true cost of his greed. Mom, he said, his voice a broken whisper. I'm so sorry. I just stood there, my face a blank slate. Words were not enough to fix what he had done. I know you don't believe me, he continued, a tear rolling down his cheek. But I didn't know. I didn't know about the trust. I didn't know what I was doing. Brittany, she had me convinced that we needed to do this, that it was the only way. I looked at him, and for a moment I saw the little boy I had raised, the one who was easily led astray. But I also saw the man who had tried to take my home. The two images, the innocent child and the greedy adult, were a painful paradox. I've lost everything, Mom, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Brittany left. Her parents disowned her. My friends, they don't want to be around me anymore. I have nothing left. I just looked at him, my heart aching. It was a victory, but it was a victory that left me hollow. I had won my home, but the cost was a part of my soul. I knew he was suffering, but a part of me felt no sympathy. He had brought this all on himself. I'm not looking for forgiveness, Mom, he said. I'm just sorry. He looked at me, a desperate plea in his eyes. I wanted to forgive him. I wanted to hug him and tell him everything was going to be okay, but I couldn't. Not yet. The betrayal was too deep, the wound too fresh. I just nodded, a simple acknowledgement of his words. "I'll be in touch, Michael," I said, my voice quiet and final. He knew what that meant. It wasn't a promise. It was a gesture of a ceasefire. And with that, he turned and walked away, a broken man who had finally learned the hard lesson that his mother had been trying to teach him all along. He's back, and he's sorry. But isn't enough. The final chapter will reveal whether I can find it in my heart to forgive him and what the future holds for me and my grandson. You won't want to miss the emotional conclusion.
After Michael left, the house felt heavier, the air thick with unspoken sorrow. I didn't know what to do. I had won, but what had I won? A hollow victory in a broken relationship with my son. I sat in silence for a long time, the weight of the past weeks settling on me like a shroud. I had a fortune, but I felt poor. I had my home, but it felt empty. That evening, as I was tucking Liam into bed, he looked at me, his eyes full of a wisdom that far surpassed his years. "Grandma," he said, his voice a soft whisper, "I saw what happened. Is Dad going to be okay?" My heart ached. I had fought so hard to protect him, to shield him from the ugliness of the world, and yet here it was, in my own home, in his own family. "I don't know, honey," I said honestly. "I hope so." He thought for a moment, then looked at me. "Grandma," he said, "I think you're a good person. You're brave." His words were a balm on my soul, a reminder of why I had fought so hard. For him. The next morning, I woke up with a new sense of purpose. I had fought for my home, for my legacy, for my grandson, but I had lost my son in the process. Was it worth it? I didn't know. But I knew I couldn't just sit here and let this be the end of the story. I picked up my phone, my fingers hovering over Michael's number. I took a deep breath and called. He answered on the second ring, his voice quiet, almost unrecognizable. "Mom?" he said. "Michael?" I said. "Come over. I want to talk." He came 10 minutes later, his face pale and drawn. We sat in the living room, surrounded by the silence of a house that had seen so much joy and so much sorrow. I didn't know where to begin, but he spoke first. "Mom," he said, "I've had a lot of time to think, and I was wrong. I was so wrong. I was greedy, and I was selfish, and I didn't see what I was doing to you, to us." He looked at me, and his eyes were full of a genuine sorrow that I hadn't seen in years. "I'm not asking for your money, Mom. I'm not asking for your forgiveness. I just want you to know that I'm so sorry." And as he spoke, I saw the boy I had raised. The man who had been poisoned by greed was gone, replaced by a son who was finally seeing the truth. Tears welled in my eyes. I had been so angry, so hurt, so betrayed. But seeing him like this, a broken man who had finally learned his lesson, a man who had lost everything because of his own choices, I realized that a part of me had been waiting for this moment, for him to finally see. And in that moment, the anger and the hurt began to melt away, replaced by a fragile, tentative hope. I took a deep breath. "I forgive you, Michael," I said,
my voice barely a whisper. But forgiveness isn't a one-time thing. It's a process, and it's gonna take a long, long time. He nodded, a single tear rolling down his cheek. I know, and I'll wait as long as it takes. I didn't invite him to stay for dinner, and he didn't ask. He just stood up, gave me a small, awkward hug, and walked out the door. As I watched him drive away, I felt a new kind of peace settle over me. The victory was no longer hollow. The war was over, and I had won more than just my home. I had won back a piece of my son. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but for the first time in a long time, I had hope. My legacy was secure, my grandson was safe, and my son had finally found his way back home. And that was all I could ever ask for. This is the final chapter of my story. I fought for my home, and I won. But in the end, I learned that the greatest victory of all is not about money or power, but about forgiveness and family. I hope my story inspires you to always fight for what's right and to never, ever give up on the people you love. Thank you for listening.